Over the years I made it a mission of mine to seek out as many rare and unusual video and audio formats as I can to make videos about to demonstrate them to you. Now, as a result of those videos, quite a few people get in touch and ask me to cover specific formats, and more often than not, when they do, it's one of two. It's either hit clips or pocket rockers. Now, I don't consider those particularly rare or unusual. However, since I've got both in my collection, I can cover them. We'll put hit clips to one side, and today let's have a look at pocket rockers. But first, a word from our sponsors.
Introducing pocket rockers, tiny tapes, tiny players.
Down on the corner, out in the street, pocket rockers are playing where the music feels the beat.
Pocket rockers, play them here, wear them anywhere.
Down on the corner, out in the street, pocket rockers are playing where the music feels the beat.
Tiny players, tiny tapes, pocket rockers, tapes and accessories sold separately, batteries not included, from Fisher-Price.
Pocket rockers were launched in the US in 1988, and they initially met with quite some success, although as with anything aimed at children, they suffered from the problem of it being a fad, and they tailed off in sales pretty quickly, and the product was discontinued by 1991. Now, I was much too old for this at the time it came out, although I don't think it was sold in the UK either, so that might be why I've got no recollection of it whatsoever. However, looking online, it seems that there were approximately 50 or so tapes available on the format, although it seems like the music played second fiddle to the novelty aspect of it. You were supposed to wear the tapes and swap them with your friends. And it seems like that collector's aspect is continuing to this day. These aren't cheap nowadays. There are still people that are collecting the old cartridges. And I've imported 2 tapes as well as the player to play them on from the US via eBay. Now, looking at this cartridge, on the end of it you'll see there are 2 titles on here. Those are both recorded in mono, and they're slightly abridged because they don't fit on the tape. I'll explain more on that in a moment, but you can see it's an endless loop tape. It's like a miniature 8-track. The tape goes off the centre of the reel, across the bottom over that bit of sponge, around the outside of the pinch roller, and then back onto the outside of the reel again. So once you put it in the machine, it just continuously plays until you decide to stop it. There's no beginning or end. The pocket rockers are just one in a long line of endless loop magnetic tape music formats that go all the way back to the early 1950s with things like Bernard Casino's Echo-Matic, but met with more success with the Fidelipack and their 8-track, but of course not forgetting the 4-track, the Play Tape, and the Hi-Pack, amongst others. The pocket rockers wasn't the smallest endless loop audio tape. That distinction went to the Bandai Micro cartridge, which was employed in a novelty singing Elvis figurine and a mini Wurlitzer jukebox replica. But the pocket rockers does have the honour of being the last pre-recorded endless loop audio tape cartridge to be launched and marketed to the general public. Each tape would come with a card which would have some artwork on it, as well as the name of the artist and the name of the tracks that were included on the tape. Inside that you'd find some information about the group or artist, and also a random pop trivia question. There were various designs of the players. This one here has a volume control at the bottom. We've got the speaker on the front. On the side we've got a headphone socket and then the eject mechanism. On the top is the slot into which the cartridge goes, as well as a switch which selects between the 2 individual tracks. There's a loop for a lanyard on the side. There's a belt clip on the back, and the whole thing runs from 2 AA batteries. Okay, let's put a cartridge in it and have a listen. The maximum tape length appears to be approximately 3 minutes, which means any tracks that exceed this length will be faded out before they reach the end. And once it's faded out, you get quite a few seconds of silence, perhaps about 10 or so, and then it just starts all over again. When you want the music to stop playing, well, you just eject it, at which point presumably you'd attach it to your clothes like a brooch, and then when you put it back in the machine it just carries on from where it left off. Now, as you'd expect from a speaker that size, it doesn't sound very good at all. However, if you plug headphones into this, it really doesn't sound all that bad. Have a listen to a direct feed that I've taken off it. Now, you might have noticed a bit of wobbling there, a bit of speed irregularity or wow and flutter, and that's because the belt is worn and it needs replacing. To get at that, I have to take out 4 screws on the back and 1 additional hidden screw that's on the front in the middle of the volume control. And the other reason I know that's there is because when I was researching the Pocket Rocker, I came across Databits' video here on YouTube where he demonstrated how to take one apart. So I've put a link to his channel along the bottom of the screen, as well as in the video description text box, because I think if you enjoy my videos, then you'll like his too, because it seems like he covers much the same stuff. In fact, when I've looked through his back catalogue, it looks like he's covered quite a few things I have before I got around to doing them. But now we're inside here, let's just have a look around. So you can see on the right hand side, that's the cartridge slot with a spring-loaded door at the front and the playhead at the back. So as you push the cartridge in, on the left hand side, that little arm is spring-loaded. That's to hold the cartridge in place so it doesn't slide out when you turn the player upside down. And then the tape gets pushed between the bit of sponge or the felt and the playhead on the right hand side. And of course it goes from the right hand side across to the left where the pinch roller is, which is pushed up against a capstan. Now, if I remove this cartridge from here, we can see it's just using a standard stereo tape head, the same kind you get in a cassette player. Although in a cassette player, you'd play one half of the tape, you'd then get to the end and either flip the tape over or spin the head around to play the other half, so it would play across the full width of the tape. With this, it doesn't use the second half of the tape, so it's only using the top half, and it's split that instead of into one stereo program. We've got 2 separate mono programs which you select between electronically by flipping the switch on the machine. Now, to replace the belt, which is what I originally opened this for, I'll need to get to the other side of this circuit board. But before I do that, I just want to show you how it operates. There's a switch here at the bottom, and as the cartridge goes in, it pushes that down, which then starts the motor. If I put some batteries in here, if you just keep your eye on the belt there, you'll see that when that switch is activated, the belt's spinning round. Now, although it's functional at the moment, it's only a matter of time before this belt perishes and fails, because after all, it could be up to 30 years old, and once they go, then they start turning to mush and are much harder to remove. So you can see it's losing a bit of its elasticity here. Unfortunately, I haven't got the right size replacement in the house at the moment, although I now know what size I need, so I've ordered one, but I'm just going to park that for the moment because I want to move on, because there's a few things I still need to know about this format, and the only way I'm going to be able to find out is by doing a bit of an experiment. The first thing I want to find out is tape speed. You see, a standard cassette runs at 4.76 centimetres a second, or 1 7/8 inches. I suspect the Pocket Rocker is running at the same speed, but I can't find anything online that gives me that information, so I'm going to have to find out for myself. And the reason I'm intrigued about it is I'm just wondering why they didn't choose to run it at a slightly slower speed. After all, it's only a toy for kids. It doesn't have to be hi-fi, and then they'll be able to get a full single on it without having to fade it out before it gets to the end. And then the second thing I want to find out is anything recorded on that other half of the tape the player can't play? It's very unlikely, but it's just something that I'd like to know. And to find out the answer to these questions, I'm going to take the tape out of this damaged Huey Lewis and the News Pocket Rockers that's lost its sponge and put it inside the shell of a normal compact cassette. So I'll just take the audio tape section out of the cassette, leave those red headers in place, and I'll get the Huey Lewis Pocket Rockers and play it until it gets past the fade out, so it's in the section before the track starts, so I'll know that when I do cut it, I'm not going to be slicing it in half midway through the track. So once I've got it in the right position, it's just a matter of pulling the tape out, snipping it, and then putting it in between the 2 leaders that are inside the cassette shell. Unfortunately, I'd only got 1/4 inch splicing tape in the house, suitable for use with my reel-to-reel machine, but that's twice the width of the tape that's used inside a cassette, so I've had to cut some of that down so I can use it to hold the 2 ends of this together. So it's a little bit of a fiddly operation, but I managed to get it done. We've got the tape inside the cassette now. Now, all the time I was doing this, I had to keep track of which side of the tape I thought the recordings were on. You see, on a cassette tape, it's the side of the tape which is towards the bottom which gets played, the tape spools from the left reel to the right one, and if you were to put, say, a cassette down on a table, it's the half of the tape which is nearest the table surface, which is the one getting played. However, in a pocket rockers, the cassette head is the other way up, so it's the top half of the tape which is getting played, and those two channels, rather than being stereo, of course, are the two separate recordings that you flip between by sliding the switch on the side of the machine. So to play a pocket rockers tape in a cassette player, you have to get the recordings to go past the active part of the head, which is towards the bottom, which means flipping the tape over, and that means that the tape will be getting played backwards, and you'll be hearing both tracks at the same time. So let's find out if I've got this right. It's not entirely obvious when listening to that exactly what speed it's playing at, so I captured the audio into Audacity and reversed it and then listened to the individual tracks, and it turns out that it has been recorded at the same speed as a standard audio cassette. One thing that does stand out when looking at this though is how perfectly synchronised those two tracks are. They both start at exactly the same spot and they fade out together. Just have a listen. So the only job I've got left to do is to find out whether there's anything recorded on the other half of the tape. And the entirely predictable answer is there's nothing on there. It's just I thought there might be the slim possibility that they'd use a tape twice for two different artists and just orient it differently in the cartridge depending upon which one you bought, but I can understand that could get a bit confusing. Now, as far as why they didn't run the tape a little bit slower so they could get a full single on there, well, I presume it's just so they could use standard cassette motors and cassette duplication facilities. Meanwhile, the set of assorted belts that I ordered from eBay has turned up, so I'll just need to pick one of these closest in size to the original. The original is the one on the right that's shaped a little bit like an egg, and that's because it's been held in that position for decades. So we'll get rid of that one. Put the new one in its place. It looks a little bit smaller, but I think it's probably about the right size. It's probably the size the original one was before it got stretched. And this is going to get rid of that wow and flutter that I was hearing. Now, I see tips from people saying you can soak belts in warm water and things to get them the right shape again, more malleable. However, if a belt's been in this thing for 30 years, it's not very long now before it's just going to perish. So I might as well replace it while I've got the thing open. Right, got it all back together again. Let's just have a quick test. It's doubtful I'll ever use this again, but at least it's working perfectly now. Now, I know that none of this really matters now, as this is something that came and went many years ago. However, looking back on it, I do find it to be a bit of a confused product. It's hard to pin down exactly the age group that they were aiming at. It's sold as a product for children aged 7 and up, and I guess the kids in the adverts were around 8 to 10 years old, and the trading, collecting and wearing aspects of these cartridges would appeal most to children of that age group. But how many kids that age were really into Genesis, and how many of them could have correctly answered trivia questions about Boston? Back when I was around that age, a Sony Walkman was completely unaffordable. However, by the time the Pocket Rocker was on the market in the late 80s, you could have got an auto-reverse personal stereo here in the UK for just £15, and if you were happy to do away with a rewind button, you could get something like this for just under a tenner. And I'm sure that most kids who had a choice between owning a toy that could play 3/4 of a single from a very limited selection, or owning a proper cassette player just like their big brothers that could play real cassettes bought in a record store, would opt for the latter. But reading about it online, it seems there are plenty of people who look back on this fondly as one of their favourite toys from their childhood. So what do I know? If you want to find out what titles were released on the Pocket Rockers format, if you take a look in the video description text box, you'll find a link to the appropriate section of the This Old Toy website, which provides a list of all the titles that were made available, as well as details of the various accessories and players that Fisher-Price made. And yes, if you're still wondering, I will be getting around to covering hit clips at some point, which in effect is Pocket Rockers' solid-state successor, but that's something for another day. This was my video about Pocket Rockers, and that's it for the moment. As always, thanks for watching.